Right, we have several questions in the Q&A box, and we have about 15-20 minutes. So I have unilaterally, as chair, chosen 3 of those questions. Some I've merged. So I just want to say thanks to everybody who has posted a question. And I hope that we managed to cover most of your questions. The first one we're going to kick off is a very practical one from Marion Calder. She says that we know that many frontline workers in the violence against women and girls sector do not support a mixed sex provision. However, their voices are shut down, leading to sometimes a hostile working environment. How do we get through to the boards and senior management in this sector about the impact of mixed sex provision? Pragna, you touched on that. Would you like to kick off, please?
Yes, I mean, I don't think there's an easy answer here, partly because I think people's jobs are at risk, and also because there's a wider hostility and, you know, what we were talking about, which is a suppression of free speech, of the suppression of anyone who dares to transgress from what is, you know, an increasingly an orthodoxy in terms of trans rights. All I can say is that we have to find ways to mobilize politically as women. And I think that that includes working with survivors, trying to get the message across, particularly mobilizing survivors of abuse, that services, these kinds of services, that the mixed services will have an enormous impact on their ability to exit abuse, their ability to seek, you know, to sort of heal themselves in context of safety, and even their ability to access justice. The way we have to do it is to work with, see the struggle as a political struggle and mobilize women, rather than mobilizing organizations, rather than, because I think women are political subjects, and we sometimes forget this because we reduce them to service users or you know, sort of victims. So I think it's really vital that we find ways of mobilizing. And all I can think about is the way in which we, when I was at Southall Black Sisters in 2009, when our funding was threatened for different reasons as a result of Ealing Council's austerity measures, we had to mobilize very hard in a context where everybody said, you just have to accept the reality. The reality is that there is austerity and spending cuts. The reality is that you must accept commissioning cultures that basically undermine specialist services. And we mobilized our service users. We got them to write letters. We explained the situation. We got them to write letters explaining to the council leaders and so on, as, you know, why their services mattered and what it meant to have women-only services, particularly in their case as BME women. So I think that we've lost somehow. Feminism is for me, has kind of delinked itself from political struggles to a large extent. I think I'm not saying that about, you know, the wonderful work that's going on in terms of the mobilizations outside the Scottish Parliament that's coming up and so on. But I think the only way to bypass boards and management of organizations, women or otherwise, is to mount a major feminist fight back and to take the message to women themselves as subjects, and to explain that that ultimately this is about saving the very idea of women as a biological sex. And if we lose that, we will lose the entire infrastructure of our rights and protections that have been fought for, you know, for many, many years, and fought for by not only women in the trade union movement or in the labor movement, but also by BME women who are also part of those movements, by the anti-racist movements, by others, you know, in the past that were secular, that were progressive. So we kind of, I think there's a kind of need to inject an urgency in what is effectively a feminist, what should be effectively a feminist fight back.
Thanks very much, Pragna. Hey, Anne, as a long-time trade unionist, do you have any thoughts on how you approach particularly senior management on this issue?
Yeah, well, so, I mean, one of the difficulties in the voluntary sector is that the trade union organisation is quite weak. So that's a fact in terms of trying to establish collective voice. There are kind of guidance and principles around, you know, principles in Scotland around fair work, which I think we should be making far more of, that were signed up to by the Scottish TUC and by voluntary sector, you know, by a whole number of higher level organisations have signed up to the principles of fair work, and that has to include both not bullying of women who express different views, but recognising some of the problems we've been discussing. I think, I mean, I just think I agree very much with Pragna there as well, because that feminism, that political voice for women has to also come together in the movement, you know, like, but so service users or women who survivors who are not getting the service they need and require have to tell politicians about it. Now, if we can help as a trade union movement do that, then we should be doing that. And that's our failing if at the current point in time we're not doing that. So we say about having voice, giving voice for those who are not well organised has to be part of our job. And I think we're failing on that at the moment in the broadest sense. And so if we can, you know, that's building that alliance across all those movements that we've been discussing urgently is what we have to do. Because the boards don't operate in a vacuum. You know,
yes.
you know, and there's the funding, the whole funding question, where trans inclusive, the phrases around trans inclusive services are acting to exclude some women.
Yes.
That has to be put in front of the politicians who make the funding decisions, the funding guidance decisions.
I mean, there's both Pragna's response and yours, Anne, is actually leading on to a response to the second question I was going to ask. So if you don't mind, I'm going to broaden it out, keeping in mind Marian's question about violence against women sector in particular. But we've had a few other questions from women on the chat about how do you make your voice heard, either within your political party, within your trade union, or even just directly to your member of the Scottish Parliament or your local councillor, or indeed the voluntary sector. So how do women mobilise, as Pragna was urging? Lucy, I'll come to you, and then Shireen, I'll...
Okay, so I mean, it will follow on from the last question, Marian's question too, which is one of the things that's very striking in Scotland, it may be true elsewhere, but Scotland's where I know best, is how much our political system, government and parliament, has got very comfortable dealing with a handful of organisations. It's very clear. It's amazing. You know, three organisations believe something. It doesn't matter what anyone else says. I'm very struck by it, really struck. We tried, and one of the things we've tried to do, because we don't regard ourselves as expert in any of these things, what we're expert in far more is process. So what we would like to do, we'd like to go lock picking is what we see our job. Doors for other people to walk through. It's not just barging through them ourselves. And one of the things we did try to do, and I think it's a sobering example. There was a point during the parliamentary process on the bill where a woman representing, well, was she representing the Church of Scotland? They slightly distanced themselves, made an incredibly unfortunate comment. Susan wrote a very powerful comment, a column about survivors being used. So a number of people were in touch with us, said that they would like the women who are survivors of various forms of violence against women, said they would go and speak to the committee. They'd be happy. And this is a brave thing to do. And they do it in a private session. This can be done. The committee had held a private session with trans groups of 17 different trans people. They'd met in 4 panels, so we knew they could do this. So we approached the committee on behalf of these women, for whom this was a really difficult thing for them to do. Let's be really clear. If we're coming forward like this, put themselves forward in an environment they didn't regard as necessarily particularly, well, put it bluntly, as a hostile environment. This was very brave. We wrote to the committee. They strung us along for weeks. They hadn't thought, when they put their own work plan together, to look at anybody outside the obvious, the big organizations, though they brought in individuals the lived experience from the trans side, but not from the women's side. And they strung us along and got to the end of the summer, and that was it. No meeting. And I feel awful. Obviously, we feel awful for these women. They are extraordinary women. And we are still looking at how we still, because the committee is still involved in this process, it's still going to do the next few stages. We still want to look at how we could possibly bring forward. But committee says, send us comments in writing. Well, people have sent comments in writing, and these women are willing to provide more, but it's not the same. So I do want to come back to how I think Pragna's dead right. You need to break through this organizational, solid, this robbing of individual women's political voice. Really, we know, those of us who've got some kind of position in the structure that we've got through various forms of privilege, frankly, that we have, need to think, how do we use that to open up those doors, to pick the locks? There is one thing I want to just mention, and for example, the Scottish government's just let a contract, or is seeking people, so they can have a panel of 20 women they can talk to. They're going to spend £100,000 a year plus VAT, so they can select 20 women who can be talked to about stuff. And this is typical of the problem. It's all these top-down things. So I think I don't know what the answer is, but I can see what the problem is, and we need. It's exactly right, and it goes beyond this topic. Yes. Absolutely beyond this topic. This is not just about this topic. This topic is just the one that we've hit it on. We absolutely need to. Pragna's absolutely right, and I just want to say we need to build on her suggestions, and we need to think, how do we give women, individual women, their voice back? Yep. Really important.
I think we should all apply to that panel for a start. Shireen, would you like to develop that argument a bit further? How do women mobilise their voices?
When I listen to Lucy talking about what women have tried to do to engage in the current debate, it just makes me despair, because we have tried so hard. We've tried to pull on every lever. We've invented levers. And when people are so determined not to engage, it's really hard to know what to do. I want to think about unions, because I really think we need to be working with unions. If we don't have unions that will defend women's rights, we really are sunk. And I did it spectacularly badly, so I will share what I did as an example of what not to do, because I was a trade union branch officer. I'd been on various officer roles during the 13 or 14 years I'd already been at the University of Edinburgh. This is in UCU. I think I was a qualities officer when this issue first bubbled up. And I just assumed that my comrades all knew me, the people that I'd stood shoulder to shoulder with on the picket lines and faced down management in various kind of not very easy negotiations. I thought they would be with me, even if they disagreed on some substantive issue. I thought they would be with me and have my back. So I didn't do the things that I know as a campaigner that you need to do. I didn't go and seek my allies. I didn't go and build my networks before taking the issue to the union, because I thought it would be easy. I thought the moment I said, in the first instance, we have to defend Anne, she's our trade union rector, I thought everybody would say, yes, of course we have to, no matter where they stood on sex or gender. And when I started realising about this shutdown on academic freedom, I thought in a university, when I said we need to be campaigning to protect academic freedom and freedom of expression, these two different things at this university, I thought they would say yes, even if they disagreed with me on the substance. So I didn't do the building. I didn't go looking for the women and a few men who would get together to go to branch meetings. Two of us took a motion to a branch meeting thinking it would be easy. Of course, the other side mobilised. They brought, in a university, there are lots of doctoral students who have the right to join the union. So they got them all to join the union. They brought them all to a meeting, packed the meeting, and the motion didn't get through. They did all that and I didn't. So I think when it comes to unions, and I do think unions are really important, but I think there's behind the scenes work. There has to be some lobbying. There has to be building your support. And what's happened now is we're back-footed. So we're into this terrible vicious cycle where people don't speak up and where it's impossible to network because you don't know who is going to shout you down as being a bigot and bully you. But I do think we've got to do that. So I think we've got to be, however we do it, building those networks, finding where the support is, helping each other be a bit braver. And we have to get our senior colleagues in workplaces to be braver. So I talked in universities about the dreadful position that people on precarious contracts are in. And I do think that. I think it's really difficult for those women to speak out. I'm actually losing patience with the senior women, with the professors who say, oh, but I've got my reputation to consider. You know, people who are in their 60s who are worried about curating their long-term legacy. I think, stop it. You know, now is the moment to get brave. So I do think it's about networking. It's about building our networks, building our solidarity the way that, you know, women in the women's movement have always done. And getting our more secure, our more stable colleagues, our more stable sisters, the people with the broader shoulders need to be on side doing that heavy lifting, because it's so difficult for the women who are in more precarious and more difficult and lower paid positions who've got so much more to lose.
Absolutely. I'm sure we can all give examples of private messages we've had from senior women who said, totally agree with what you're saying, but I'm not in a position to be able to say it publicly. You know, it can be very frustrating. Pragna, you started this discussion about the need for women to mobilise. Is there any single piece of advice you would give to the women on this webinar this evening about the first steps they can take to get together?
I mean, I think Shireen is so right. I think my one piece of advice is we've got to let go of our fear. We have to let go of our fear and find a collective way of supporting each other so that we can break through this kind of censorship, this hostility, the threats that prevent us from, you know, campaigning for our rights. And I just feel that we can only do that if more and more women speak up. And I think Shireen is right. Those who are in a better position to have to be more resilient and have to speak out. I'm hopeful. I'm seeing more women speak out. You know, whether it's on social media or in other ways. So I think that's really the key, is that we've just got to remember that this is we're engaged in a major political struggle where our allies, those who should be our allies, are actually working against our interests as women. Those who, you know, we would want to form alliances with to fight on so many issues are infected by this, what I call really dogmatic, regressive identity politics. It's infected the trade union movement, the student movement, the women's movement, you know, the anti-racist movement, you name it. And so I think it's a really, really difficult task. But as women, we've got to come together to empower each other through our collective voice. And, you know, how can we not? We've got to also be creative. So if women are frightened of speaking out, why can't they speak out without showing their faces? Why can't they speak out without revealing their identities? Survivors do it all the time when they're talking about their experiences. And we only have to look abroad and see the amazing Iranian women and what they're doing to see that, you know, the dangers they face is nothing like what, you know, nothing in what we face is nothing in comparison to what they face. So somehow we've got to let go of the fear, to find the courage to come together and to really reiterate what feminism stands for.
Thanks, Pragna. Hey, just after 8:30, so I have one final question for each of the panelists. I'm going to start with Anne, then I'll go around Lucy, then Pragna, and I'll finish with Shireen. And the question was the first question that was put in the Q&A tonight, and it's from Obsolescence, who many of us know. In 12 months' time, 5 years' time, what will women's rights in Scotland, and I would like to expand that out to the rest of the UK, what will women's rights in the UK look like? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Anne?
Yeah, there has to be, I guess, there absolutely has to be. I think what I was thinking listening to everybody is, along with everybody else, there's times when we're tired, there's times when it all feels too much. And so it's really, so I'm getting upset here, it's really important that we are there for each other. That's why I wanted to have a physical meeting tonight, not do a Zoom call. But the isolation that many of us have felt over the last few years in different settings, and is felt by many of you on the call tonight, you have to remember you're actually not on your own. It's just really, really difficult to hold on to that. And I do believe that the tide is turning, if you want to use that phrase. We're not in the same place we were a few years ago. Hard questions have to be asked, as I was flagging up. How does it work if we have gender self-ID? How does it affect all those policies we have that protect women in the workplace? What actually does it mean? And those questions have to be asked of the people who are doing our collective bargaining on our behalf and who are making employment law on our behalf. And I feel we're in a stronger position to be asking those questions. And asking the questions will build the movement. And I just, you know, I referred a tiny bit to our history, but that's what keeps me going. Those women worked so hard to improve. I mean, talk about hard work. They worked so hard in their day jobs and to improve working conditions, family conditions, living conditions for that goal. It was in one of the questions, that goal of a more equitable society. And I will not walk away from that. It's our movement. I'm not giving it to anybody else. It's ours. That's mine.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you. Lucy, is there light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, well, I'm a relentless, possibly mad optimist, or I wouldn't have stepped into this in the way I did, I don't think. I echo Anne. I mean, I work all the time with Kath and Lisa. I couldn't begin to have done what I've done. I wouldn't even try it on my own. I mean, the three of us function the way we do, and it's absolutely essential. It keeps us completely sane. But there is so much coming up, and well, so the reasons I feel optimistic is I look at younger women, and there are far more younger women who want us out here, who need us out here, then I can easily express that, because they are, for all the reasons that Shireen said, more vulnerable. I look at young women I know in the school system. I know a WhatsApp group of teenage girls who got together partly through their mothers and partly through their friends as a support group. But it's happening, it's out there. And these young women are there, and they're at the sharp end of Lou's being messed up in schools and all, you know, they're experiencing this and they're living it. And I think there is grounds for optimism there. And there are things coming ahead. There are political fights which are not just about women that will hit women. Everything about the crashing of the economy is a disaster, an absolute disaster for women. There are things like the surrogacy debate. We're going to have to really watch that one. You know, where's the Law Commission going with surrogacy? There is so much. I think there was a period, if you're my age, I'm in my mid-50s, there was a period, I sort of took my head, I was always interested in feminism, but I thought it was fixed. I think a lot of us felt that, you know, we could go and do other things now because it was, you know, but of course we were wrong. I mean, Pragna knew we were wrong all along, but some of us had kind of taken the view, those were luckier situations, we were wrong. And I'll never know I'm wrong again. And I'm quite optimistic that not knowing I'm not going to make that mistake again makes me optimistic. And I think there's so much more coming up. And now I know all these wonderful women. My life is much enhanced. I mean, I live in a state of absolute despair and frustration with politics. I've never been more depressed about politics, but I have never felt more buoyed up by the world outside that formal political sphere that I'm now part of. I mean, really, you know, extraordinary women everywhere, and some men, and you know, that's great. And that it's hard not to feel a bit optimistic.
Yes, Lucy, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yes, Pragna, are you optimistic?
I am. I think we have to be. We can't let despair, you know, we can't be overwhelmed by despair and helplessness. I think there is hope. And I think that there is hope where there is anger, and where there are angry women, and there are angry women everywhere, and there are angry young women everywhere too. And I think it's just a question of trying to find ways of mobilizing and connecting and shaping values and shaping, you know, a kind of movement that is based on very progressive, I'm going to say it, socialist values.
Yeah.
And I'm always reminded, also, I just want to end by saying I'm always reminded by this wonderful historian and writer and scholar in the US called Howard Zinn. And he made me realize just why one has to be hopeful. When he had said something, I can't remember the exact quote, but he said something about when we struggle, you know, it's not struggle for some kind of utopian egalitarian future that we have to aim for. It's the little victories along the way that we have to, that will give us the hope. And I think there are little victories along the way everywhere, in every kind of community, in every kind of, you know, situation of struggle. People are winning little victories. So I think that has to be a sign of hope, rather than, you know, sort of just constantly thinking that there is something to aim for right at the end. Thanks,
Pragna. Shireen?
Oh dear, it's what those three all said. What can I possibly add? The question was 12 months and 5 years. To be honest, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, especially in Scotland. But we have each other. You know, 3 years ago, I don't think I'd met Lucy. I don't think I'd met you, Susan. Now I'm like Lucy, I now know all these other women, all these wonderful women, and we have each other. We have each other's backs. We're building a movement, the like of which, you know, I came into the women's movement in the late 80s as it was fragmenting and falling apart. So I've never really known that energy of a women's movement. We've got a women's movement now, and we're gathering women, and we're getting stronger. And yeah, I talked a bit about being brave before. We do need to be brave, but being brave means different things to so many different women. And being brave for some women means braving that conversation with your next door neighbour, or it means putting something anonymously in a chat room, and that's fine. You know, if that's where you're safe to contribute, that's your contribution. My background's nonviolent direct action. One of the things we always say is that you need the bystanders. You know, you need the people who are going to risk arrest and are going to put, you know, their bodies on the line and get locked on to the gates of Faslane or wherever it is you are. But you need the bystanders who are watching out for you, watching your back, singing the protest songs while you get arrested and taken off by the police. We need all of those women. All of those women make the movement. So I really want to say to everybody who's on this call, whatever it is you can do, never ever feel that it's not enough, or that somebody else is doing more, or that you're not brave enough. Yes, be as brave as you can. Maybe be a little bit braver. You know, just push yourself where you can. Don't make yourself unsafe. Don't push yourself so that you're burning out. We're in this for the long haul. It's a marathon and not a sprint, but we've got each other. Sometimes you'll pass the baton to another woman and you'll step out of the race for a bit. And that's absolutely fine, because we're all going to need to do that. It's the long haul. But I think in the long run, we will win because of that, as Anne says, we've got that history behind us. We've got inspiring women through the decades, through the centuries. We're not going to let our mothers down. We're not going to let our grandmothers down. We're not going to let those women who fought for the basic rights we take for granted. We're not going to let them down. We're not going to let our daughters down, or our granddaughters and their granddaughters. We're all there for each other, and I know it's going to get better. It's going to be hard. I'm not going to say it's not. We need each other. We need our love. We need our solidarity. We need strategy. We need hope, and we need anger, and we need strategy, whatever that strategy is. And we need courage, and we've got all those things. So of course it'll get better.
Thank you, Shireen. Yes, I'm very optimistic because we've got a women's movement. and it's a women's movement right across the UK. Focus is here in Scotland this week, but it is right across the UK. And I would just like to say thank you very much to Women's Place UK, who have been one of the key organisations in creating this generation, this new women's movement across the UK. So I'd like to say thank you to them for hosting tonight's event. I would like to say thank you very much to our 4 wonderful speakers, to Shireen, to Lucy, to Pragna, and to Anne. And I would also like to say thank you very much to everybody who has participated in tonight's event. We do need bystanders. We need participants at every level, whether it is getting arrested, as you say, Shireen, or whether it's simply logging on to a Women's Place UK event. And we've had people from Canada, from Brighton, from the Highlands, from right across the UK and elsewhere. So thank you very much. And one final thing before we close, just a reminder that at 11:15 on Thursday, women and men are invited too, but women are gathering outside the Scottish Parliament to make our voices heard about gender recognition reform. And we hope that some of our politicians, at least, will be listening. So if you can at all come, then please, you'll be very warmly welcomed. And thank you again for attending tonight's event. Thank you. Good night.